Welcome to Cancer and Peace. My name is Sean Stewart, and I'm here with my good friend, our host, Peter Scalzo, 20-year cancer journey. And we're talking story work still, right?
Yeah, story work.
Story work, yeah. Did I say, it came out weird, didn't it?
No.
I thought it did. Yes, there was like a...
repeated it.
You repeated. Okay, that's fine. You can do that. This is episode 98. Can you believe that?
98.
We are 2 episodes away from the big 100.
I'm sure no one has listened to all 98. If they have, they should let us know because they're going to get a special something.
A special prize, yeah. Even if
Either
they're lying.
that or they're going to need help somewhere.
Yeah. We will have a quiz. If anybody...
Therapist. We could get them a therapist.
A therapist, yes. You get therapy sessions with somebody that is reputable. That would be good.
Yeah.
I think, it's just hard to even imagine that this is number 98. We've had a lot of conversations here.
Man.
And this has been a fun segment to me. The story work is just a big part. And there's a concept that it came out of emotionally healthy spirituality, going back to go forward. There's a really important thing about that. And so story work is going back to go forward. It's not going back to navel gaze, but it's a way of going forward. And so the last couple of weeks, Peter has shared stories, and they were not formative year stories, though. And the last one was really, these were both really powerful. They were stories inside your cancer journey and the importance of them. And I think that is really good. But what we wanted to do is to show a different side of story work that's important on your journey. And I would argue that as you entered into your cancer journey, it was one of the major walls of your life. And you also had a major wall of divorce. And there were other things that were happening that made just a accumulation of a lot of large hard events happening that we would call a wall happening at the same time. And those things that showed up in your past showed up in spades at that point in time on your journey. And so we're going to go back to your past now just to look at some of your formation in a story today, right? That's the idea.
Yeah. And I'll just a comment. I help lead a cancer support group, and I'm amazed at the wall stories within the group, each individual, not just the cancer wall, other walls going on at the same time. So my hope is that my journey through my walls, being transparent about my life, vulnerable, that it'll some way be helpful for somebody that can relate to something, and maybe they can start to really record and analyze their own story,
And nobody avoids the wall. This is something that the reason why you're talking about this is it's not as if walls are for a few key individuals that turn out to be superstars in the faith or something like that.
No.
Everybody has a story, and that story is better than any Hollywood script that was ever written. Everybody.
Yep.
And being able to engage your story in your walls is important. And so you want to kick us off today with
so this is a story from my childhood, and I tried to go back as far as I could in the thought process, and I just came up with one, and I'll just read it. Yeah. Describes the time period in my life. So this is how it goes. I think I was 5 or 6 years of age. I remember the room next to the kitchen that was more or less a pass-through room to the kitchen and back and forth to the living room. The pass-through room had a fireplace and family pictures above a bookcase. It was not particularly a large room. The room did have a small couch and a few chairs. My dad chose this room to have meetings, and years later, when he would disciple young men when I was about 12 years of age. I don't remember anyone else home. I am the youngest of 4 children, the youngest grandchild, basically the youngest of everything. I had curly hair that the women touched and said, I have to go to a beauty parlor for this. I remember myself as a mostly good-natured boy who loved the outdoors and being rough and dirty. I was basically average in height and weight. That day it was about 6 in the evening. Mom was in the kitchen humming. Boy, did she hum a lot. I don't remember my mom being cross, mean, or depressed. At least that's what it seemed like. She would get tired. Once a year at Christmas, her annual swear word would come if she dropped something or burnt something. She loved her family, and I felt that love as a secure place, her arms wrapping around me. I remember feeling it to the core of my being. I'm not sure what I was wearing. I have seen pictures. I probably threw on pajamas. I was not particularly neat. My room was a mess. Mom didn't notice my clothes except on Sunday for church.
Hmm.
She was humming and doing her usual, preparing a yummy meal. The house was warm and inviting. I think it was fall time. It was still light outside, but was beginning to dim. Mom was sipping on a glass of wine. The smells were food and the carpet underneath. Mom did not put much stock in a clean and tidy house. It did not seem to matter to her. I was playing with a toy truck on the carpet, making noises and smashing it into matchbox cars and other trucks. I heard Dad's car pull into the garage. My mom came running into the room and said, "Time to go to your room for the evening." I remember asking, "Why?" "Why, Mom?" "Because your father's home and we will be eating dinner alone." I remember this being a normal occurrence. I remember going to my room choking back tears. Didn't my dad want to see me? I haven't seen him all day. I feel excluded and minimized. It makes me sad. I wish it had been explained to me that Mom and Dad wanted some time together. But why at so many dinners? I didn't feel wanted. I felt like a burden. I don't think he wanted to know about my day or how I felt. Perhaps some anger, but definitely sadness. I remember burying myself in my pillow. The tears flowed. Why didn't Mom say something to Dad and fix this?
So as you connect on this story today, I heard some adult emotions, not 5-year-old emotions too. In other words, the words you used were adult words, minimized, some of those. So I would guess that those are some of the feelings you have when you recollect the story.
Yeah. When I looked back at that 5 and 6 little guy, I think it, I remember not understanding why we weren't having a meal together, because that was always kind of a special time, I think, for our family was mealtime, because you caught up on each other's day. But this happened regularly where I was kind of shuttled off to bed before Dad got home, or right when he was getting home.
So was that the norm, and the larger said
so.
it was the exception?
Yeah, I think. I mean, when I got older, I can't recall. Dinners were like sporadic, but Sundays we always had a family dinner. But I think during the week this was more the norm.
This was the norm.
Yeah, where the kids were fed earlier, and then it was just a time alone for my mom and Dad.
I was curious of something as you were sharing that, because you, early on in the story, you talked about feeling the warmth of your mom's embrace, and like you could feel her hugs. You had all these warm and physically warm, not inappropriate way, but physically warm feelings from your mom. Those are words of, I think maybe the more clinical term is like secure attachment. You described what secure attachment would seem like, right? Describe how that played out with your mom and dad in normal everyday life. Did you see that same type of thing in the way they would interact with each other in your normal everyday life?
You mean the way I felt her presence, her warm embrace, that? Or?
How did you see your mom and dad engaging in their own presence between themselves in the normal everyday world?
I think they seemed to have a good relationship. Dad was definitely sort of the guy in charge, and Mom was supportive. And
so I want to zero in on how did your family do physical touch.
Yeah.
With like your mom and dad, how did they demonstrate that with you? Because and the reason why is because you highlighted that with your mom, that you had this secured attachment where you knew, and it wasn't just a feeling. You had physical touch. You had your mom's embrace in your life in a real way, and that created secure attachment. It created a safe place for you. And so go back to their relationship. How did they do physical touch? How did they show affection? How did those things show?
It's a great question, because they definitely had physical affection one towards each other. Hugging, kissing, that kind of thing, holding hands. But their affection towards, at least I'll just speak for myself, not my siblings, there really wasn't any. I think when I was really little.
You said there, but.
Meaning my parents.
But you described in the story the feelings from your mom.
Yeah, so I think that, my early memories were, mom was the more affectionate, crawl up into the lap kind of parent. I don't really remember ever crawling up into my dad's lap, but.
When did it stop with your mom?
Probably about this time. Yeah. And then it never really picked up again. And we were not a real affectionate family. In fact, it's kind of one of the struggles I probably had growing up, like raising my kids. I hug them and I tell them I love them and that kind of thing. But we were not a stand there with your arm around the person. I wasn't.
This is interesting because so you were living off of the feelings of attachment that came long before this moment.
Absolutely.
It wasn't that this moment was secure attachment with your mom and that she was giving that.
Right.
Because it's funny that you would actually take time to write that into the story while it wasn't happening in this story.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true.
It's interesting. And so as I just ponder that for a second, your feelings towards your mom were what?
My feelings towards my mom were safe. I would say one of warmth and safety. I know warmth's not a feeling, but definitely a feeling of being safe, being comforted, having someone who listened well. So they would definitely be feelings of love, comfort, even joy. That kind of thing.
And now when you look at your dad, what were the feelings you had in this story towards your dad?
Estranged. I feel like he was like a stranger. Harsh and kind of serious.
Yeah.
I mean, he was his personality, but I viewed it as a rejection of me. That kind of seriousness. Mom was more the funny, laugh with each other kind of person. I think that made me feel like I belonged. And Dad was more the strict, as far as serious guy, business-like.
I already know the answer to this question because this story happened to be one that you shared with me a while back, and we talked about it quite a bit. And I was fascinated by something. I'll let you re-answer for our audience, but there was something that showed up in this story that I thought was really interesting, is that you had feelings that your dad was the kind of almost like the bad guy because, you were sent upstairs your room when Dad got home.
Yeah.
And the more fascinating thing to me was it wasn't your dad that sent you up to the room. It was your mom.
Right.
And it wasn't just that she sent you up there because anybody could have been said, but she set you up, meaning that for this story to play out, you had to already be fed.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about her in there cooking and so forth. She'd already done that for the kids.
Yeah.
And so when Dad showed up, it was always her intention to shoo you up to the room in her own heart and mind. And so you have all these feelings of warmth towards your mom and feelings of rejection from your dad, but it was your mom who, I'll say, did the deed of creating this space.
Sneaky woman.
No, interesting,
but
right?
it's and you pointed it out to me, and it didn't dawn on me. I'm in my 60s. It didn't dawn on me. And then I was like, hold on. She made her own choice.
Yes.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I always thought this was my dad's like choice to come home and say, you make sure those kids are in bed. No, mom created the evening for them both. And part of that was she chose to get me into bed as quickly as possible when dad came home. Yeah.
And you would say today that, I mean, I know this and I think you've stated this in front of you, so I don't think I'm going to be saying something new, but you would say one of your struggles is codependency, meaning people pleasing.
Yes.
And so people pleasing here, it's more likely that you're right in some way that, hey, your dad did desire this time with your mom alone.
Yes.
But it was her codependency that actually was the learned trait from you, is that she demonstrated this codependency of, even though it created a lack of connection between your dad and the rest of the family.
Yeah.
In codependency, she met that need. She arranged it. She facilitated. She put all the work in her own codependency to facilitate something that you're writing today as a form of a story of harm, and not the worst harm. It's not like an abusive thing, but it shows there's a disconnect. And I know that you and I have talked about disconnect because one of the big feelings that I think you've had in your journey is lack of approval from, as you can learn, lack of connection that was there. And so this is an early story that demonstrated, and it wasn't just this harsh dad who was sending the kids to their room. It was a codependent mom who put all the effort into pleasing your dad, into meeting this.
Yeah, it's now because of my own recovery work and work I've done, I understand codependency, and I know that I struggle with that, but it's really interesting to analyze this, even with a balanced inventory. Like, mom was a very empathic person, but she was a huge people pleaser, and that was me. And that's how I'm wired. I'm wired more like my mom. And so, her part in this was being codependent, people pleasing, all that, when in fact, she may have felt strongly, oh, Peter needs 5 minutes with his father. But she was willing, in order to please so much, to say, okay, he has to go to bed. Because I think those nights I never even saw my dad.
I was getting ready the very next question that I haven't asked you.
Because I went to my bedroom, and I think
were there weeks where the weekdays you didn't really see your dad?
Yeah, probably, because he had gone, he went to work ritually.
Yep.
And then there were times he came home. Now, as I got older, of course, maybe I'd be watching TV and I'd see him or something, and I might eat with them, kind of thing. But
in this window of your life, there were weeks that went by that
probably,
you didn't see your dad.
Probably,
not because he wasn't in and out of the house.
Right.
It's because of this setup.
Right.
Now, on the weekends, I'm sure you probably saw him because you said, hey, on Sunday, there's the Sunday meal.
Right.
So,
and Saturdays I would have seen him.
Okay.
For sure.
Right. So weekends.
Although he did work Saturday.
I was going to guess, as running an
retail
appliance store, that Saturdays was a business day.
Yeah.
So he was probably still actively engaged. So I wondered, How do you feel about this story now towards that with your dad and and your mom?
Well, now, I have 30 years of working, going off to a job with a suit, and whether I was practicing law for 23 years or running the family business for 8 years, this was before I had to go on disability because of cancer, and even doing law school, sandwiching that in between all that for 3 years. I definitely needed time when I got home from my job to debrief, to just be by myself, kind of thing. And I get wanting to have that time where, okay, I'm home, I'm in another setting. This is my safe setting. It's my home. I have my wife here. I think what factors into this for me was the old school of, you take care of the kids, I'll take care of the money. And I felt like Dad didn't break into the child world. Like he never changed a diaper. He didn't, he didn't like feed us or that kind of thing. He was always either at work or doing something for himself. So there was this bifurcation, and that I know I didn't do. I was as engaged in my kids' lives as I could be, given my job and everything. But back then, and I think because he never like crossed that line when I was younger, I always felt like, gosh, I don't really matter to him. And then as I started to grow older, I think every boy wants his dad to say to him, you are something else. You are an amazing little guy. And I think that.
So give yourself your message. What's the message you have for yourself?
Yes. So the message is, is that you will have value. You will become a superstar when you can work and make money. And
what's the message
productive.
You will give to that 5-year-old?
Oh, yeah. If I had that 5-year-old boy, I would scoop him up as a man, and
you do have
and
him.
love on him. Yeah.
And inside of you have him.
Yeah.
What's the message you're giving to him
is,
right now?
Is that you were a great little boy. You were a good boy, and you're a very loving boy, and you were a pleasure to have. It was great raising you. You're a great little guy. It was fun watching you get older, growing up, and but just having your presence around me just brought so much life into my life. I mean, that's how I feel about my kids,
Well, that's the thing now. There's a real need. There's a need that comes in every young boy's life and young females too. And this idea, and I'm gonna tie it into. I'm actually doing a message this weekend on this particular item, and if you go to the book of Matthew, you see Jesus' baptism, and at his baptism, God gives him a word, and his word was, "This is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased." And God knew how important it was for Jesus as his son in his human space, to be beloved, to be the apple of his eye, to be to be prized. And you described something in this story, which was you said, let's see if I have you right, but you didn't matter. That's the word you said. You felt like you didn't matter. Right. And when that happens as a young boy or as a young kid, male or female, our lives, and it is like one of our greatest desires is to be valued and to matter. And to not feel like you matter means that you're going to go searching for that.
Right.
And so when we get to your cancer journey, you're going to be searching for that. And I think we're going to do a story that I haven't heard. Yeah. But I have my bet is that we see you showing up needing to matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like we all probably have a core question.
We do.
And if I could sum up this core question, it would be, am I wanted?
Yes.
That's probably
a good way of saying it.
Yeah, yes. Underlying core question.
This is something that John Eldredge has talked about quite a bit in his work, and I've been connecting on a book, Fathered by God, that John Eldredge did, and it's really good. But it does speak to something that happens in boyhood, but it's also for women too. So I'm not trying to. This isn't just about masculine journey, but he defines the masculine journey. He defines boyhood as this point where we recognize in a very safe place that we matter greatly. Yeah, and it's something that in secure attachment and this that we get from our parents. But you're describing a story, and the reason why it's a story of harm is, in this story, you're learning that you don't matter. At least that's the perception that you have.
That's how my little 5 and 6.
This is an attack. This is not an attack. I don't think your parents knew what they were doing. Yeah, it's like your mom or your dad.
Yeah, I think I was going to say that we all grow up in broken families.
Yes,
I'm a broken I'm a broken dad. I raised 6 children as
Yes.
a broken person.
Yeah, what we don't want to, what we do not want to do in any way is for people to say, "Hey,
Right.
this isn't about attacking your parents. It's about
Right.
recognizing if we process the broken parts of our story and journey,
Yeah.
though, then we can address that in a
That's
healthy
right.
way."
It's important to do that. You know, to look at, like, to accept the reality of what happened.
Yeah, you and your dad have a great relationship now. You are not.
I see him almost every day.
Yes, this is not at all about that. It's,
No.
you're recognizing that you're living out a story, though, and that shows up in your cancer. You're
Right.
living that story as you hit your cancer journey.
Yes, because going back helps me to connect the dots of who I am today. I'm a very codependent guy even today that I work on. And I see where it goes back to.
Well, the reason why this is important is once we can come to the point of recognizing that we've been living a story that I don't matter,
Mm-hmm.
then we can hear from those around us a message that God has for you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I think that's the reason why John wrote the book Fathered by God.
Mm-hmm.
It was the idea that, you know, we do matter to the most important father there is.
Mm-hmm.
But to live that, we actually first have to figure out that we're living a different story. And then we have to hear it from people around that God's given to us to say, hey, you do matter.
Mm-hmm.
And God's message to you is you can walk in that. You matter greatly. You're deeply wanted and loved.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to reprogram then that, hey, I'm living from not a codependency of needing something from your mom or your dad or somebody around you, but I'm so loved by God, I can actually walk in that story.
Right.
And when you do that, it changes.
Mm-hmm.
So this is not about navel gazing as far as we're going
Right.
back just to drown in our sorrows of not
Yeah.
that we matter. It's no, we actually need to interpret that story and recognize we've been living it, whether we believed it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then as you recognize that you're living that story,
Mm-hmm.
how do we reprogram to what is the real story? What's the truth? Do I matter or do I not? You have to wrestle with that.
Right.
And if you do matter, why do you matter? Where does that value come from?
Right.
And then can you walk in it? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I pulled from this story is that you were connecting some early story that you started to connect with, whether it was meant to or not. And I don't believe it was. Knowing your parents,
Yeah.
they would have never been trying to harm you in a
Right. For sure.
Right.
And I think the grand story for me, because I like to be up in the helicopter looking down,
Mhm.
is I marvel at God's sovereignty or his plan. Just in being born in the family I was, and the time and age that it was, in the particular place, everything, there was a purpose behind it. But including how God has woven my story in the midst of brokenness and sin, disease, an enemy, all these forces going on. But God is still weaving something beautiful. I think out of all of our stories, if we're surrendering ourselves to him, you know what I mean? Like it's beautiful to see how God can weave a story in all this. And for me, what has really helped me in my story was to get into recovery, to really become surrendered, and then start using different tools to get healing in my life.
That's really good.
Yeah.
I want to touch another part of this story that
Yeah.
we haven't touched, and I just want to hear your thoughts on this. Is closer to the end of the story, you described, and in the past, you didn't say this in your story, but you told us a story about being called the sensitive one.
Yes.
And because you have a sensitive spirit that was
Mm-hmm.
natural inside of you.
Yes.
It was part of how God designed you.
Mm-hmm.
You went to your room and you cried. You had tears. And that ties into the sensitive side of you, that you
Mm-hmm.
felt something deeply and you expressed deep emotion. And the thing that I caught out of the story, though, is that, and I'm curious if this is a pattern or whether it's just an instance, and that is you had to process deep emotion alone.
I had to process deep emotion
alone.
Alone.
You learned
Yeah,
to process your deep emotions alone, that you could not express that in a larger environment.
Yeah, and I think my family of origin would make fun of someone who was being vulnerable. So, and then, my dad had labeled me. So how I would process it as I got older was I wouldn't process it. I would bury it. And that's the man that Leslie married. The man who buried his emotions and wouldn't, even the good ones. And so in the past 10 years, I've been trying to recapture.
So there was a time when you expressed emotion and you expressed it alone.
Yeah.
And that moved to a time of learning to bury emotions because you would have to process it alone.
Yep.
And then that built up into what I would call a volcano.
Yeah. And in the cancer space, when I was diagnosed with cancer, I rarely cried, and I wouldn't allow myself to feel like anger or sadness or doubt or anything. So, but when it became metastatic, it was almost like God said, well, okay, well then we're going to do this another way. And when I had the metastatic event in my journey in which I had to face death, my emotions I couldn't hold them back. They came out in full force.
So the cancer journey connected you back to the realist form of you.
Yep.
Because you were created a sensitive person.
Yes.
And you weren't allowed to be that. Or at least it was mocked out of you, or in some ways, your story here. And you see it starting here at a very young age.
And that part of me is what a lot of people compliment me on. The ability to sit and cry with someone or feel what they're going through. Yeah. And it's not anything I learned. It's like ingrained in me to sort of go into a room and just look at, just see people and be like, oh my gosh, there's some heaviness and things going on. And it's interesting, the work that I'm in, because I do cancer support work and also recovery work, which people are going through deep problems, deep issues. So, and I think my son is wired this way, and my son Paul, and he is pursuing psychiatry. He's in his 4th year of medical school, and I think it's because he's got that nature,
the gift, even.
Yes,
it's part of it's one of your gifts to be able to feel deeply and be. But it wasn't treated as a gift. It was it was treated almost as a curse, which is isn't it really fascinating to be able to go back to 5 and to see so much of who you are at 5. It just blows my mind now. And it wasn't until my mid 40s did I figure out that so much of me was already formed from my 4, 5, 6, 7-year-old person still inside of me, still there. That person is still driving so much of what I do. And I see it in your story too.
Yeah. Thanks, Sean.
Pretty amazing. So you see a little bit about how story work works. This is Peter in a formative years. We're going to do one more story that carries forward from this. We're going to go forward just a few years in our next episode, just to explore a little further. And hopefully, if you wonder, what does this have to do with cancer and peace? There's a reason why we started back at showing how story work worked in Peter's cancer journey.
Right.
And then we're going back here. We're kind of doing the opposite because, it was in your cancer journey and it was in your wall that you were not forced, but you were at least brought to a choice of, hey, do you want to go and do this inner journey? Do you want to find out about who you really are? Do you want to find real peace in your life, even in the midst of this storm?
And I think if you don't bounce off the wall, God wants to use the wall to reveal yourself to yourself.
To find the realist form of you that he created inside of you.
I forget what it's considered, the false self.
Yeah.
The shadow self, whatever.
The shadow.
Yeah, that you might be living and thinking this is my real, but then when you hit the wall and things start happening and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah.
This is a puzzle to me, and I think it's an invitation, right?
Yeah.
to do some work and to really allow God to do some significant healing. I mean, there's huge healing.
And there's great
in my
peace in
life.
that.
Yes.
Great peace in finding this real self that God wants to bring out and to love, to show belovedness to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for listening today. This was thanks, Peter, for sharing this story. That's really great. So,
yep. Thanks, Sean.
Have a great one.
Okay. Blessings.